1 Corinthians. The first reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 18 to 26. It talks about the wisdom of the wise. And if you went to a courtroom or a lawyer's place, it's full of big, thick books, full of laws. And that's the sort of wisdom they're talking about here. So it says, for the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided, through the foolishness of our proclamation, to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs, and Greeks desire wisdom. But we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. This is the word of the Lord. John chapter 2, verses 13 to 22. Jesus cleanses the temple. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And he told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." And the Jews said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. And after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and he believed the scripture and the words that Jesus had spoken. This is the word of the Lord.
Got a story. It's a little bit more of a grown-up story than a kid's story today, but it's still interesting. It's called The Clown of God. Many years ago in Sorrento, and that's not down the peninsula here, that's in Italy, there lived a small boy named Giovanni who had no mother and no father. He dressed in rags and begged his bread and slept in doorways, but he was happy and he could do something wonderful. He could juggle. Every day he would go to Signor Baptista's fruit and vegetable stall and juggle. He would juggle lemons and oranges, apples and eggplants, and even zucchini. Crowds would gather to watch, and when Giovanni had finished, they would buy from Signor Baptista. Then Signor Baptista's wife would give Giovanni a bowl of hot soup. It was a very good arrangement. One day a troupe of travelling players came to town, and Giovanni watched as Alencino and Colombina in their beautiful clothes danced and sang. Oh, Giovanni said to himself, that is the life for me. So when the play was over, Giovanni went and spoke to the maestro. No, no, said the maestro, I have no need for a ragamuffin. Go beg your bread somewhere else. But I could be very helpful, pleaded Giovanni. I could help unpack and pack up. I could take care of the donkey, and maestro, added Giovanni, I can juggle. Not bad, said the maestro, watching with a bit more training and practice. All right, but with no money, a place to sleep, the companionship of the finest players in Italy, and a bowl of noodles. That's all. Grazie, signor, said Giovanni. Go get your things. We leave in an hour, said the maestro. And so Giovanni said goodbye to Signor and Signora Baptista and became a travelling player. Not long after, the maestro gave him a costume, and Giovanni juggled for the crowds. He would put on a clown's face, step out from the curtain before the play began, bow, open up a colourful bag, roll out a carpet and begin. He would juggle sticks, plates, and he would balance the plates on the sticks and twirl them. He would juggle clubs, rings and burning torches. And finally, he would toss a red ball and an orange ball, then a yellow ball, a green, a blue and a violet ball until it looked as if it were juggling the rainbow. And now for the sun in the heavens, he would cry. Still juggling, he would pick up a shining golden ball and toss it higher and higher, faster and faster, and how the crowds would cheer. Giovanni became very famous, and it wasn't long before he said goodbye to the travelling troupe and set off on his own. Up and down Italy he travelled, and although his costume became more beautiful, he always kept the face of a clown. Once he juggled for a duke, once for a prince, and it was always the same. First the sticks, then the plates, then the clubs, rings and burning torches. Finally, the rainbow of coloured balls. And now for the sun in the heavens, he would shout, and the golden ball would fly higher and higher, and the crowds would laugh and clap and cheer. He was bigger than Taylor Swift. One day between two towns, Giovanni was sitting in the shade of a tree, eating a lunch of bread and cheese, and two little brothers came down the road. Will you share your food with us, good clown, they asked, for the love of God and the blessings of our brother Francis. Sit down, good fellows, Giovanni said, there is more than enough. As the three men ate, the two little brothers told Giovanni how they went from town to town begging their food and spreading the joy of God. Our founder, Brother Francis, said that everything sings of the glory of God. Why, even your juggling, said one of the brothers. That's well and good for men like you, but I only juggle to make people laugh and applaud, Giovanni said. It's the same thing, the brothers said. If you give happiness to people, you give glory to God as well. If you say so, said Giovanni, laughing. But now I must be off to the next town. Arrivederci, good brothers, and good luck. And wherever Giovanni went, the air was filled with his flying sticks and plates, his clubs and rings and torches, and always the rainbow of balls and the sun in the heavens. And wherever Giovanni went, the faces of the crowds would be all smiles, and the sound of laughter and cheers would ring through the towns. Years passed, as they do. Giovanni grew old and times became hard. People no longer stopped to watch. It's only the old clown who juggles things. We've all seen him before, they said. Giovanni was sad, but he juggled until one day he dropped the sun in the heavens and the rainbow of balls came crashing down and the crowd stood around him and laughed, but not from joy. Then they did a terrible thing. They threw vegetables and stones at Giovanni so that he had to run for his life. Beside a stream, Giovanni took off his clown face, he put away his sticks and his plates, his clubs and rings and coloured balls, he put away his costume, he gave up juggling forever. What little money he had was soon gone, and his clothes became rags, and he begged his bread and slept in doorways as he'd done as a child. "It's time to go home," the old man said wearily, and he headed back to Sorrento. It was a cold winter when he finally arrived. The wind blew hard and the icy rain was falling. Up ahead loomed the monastery church of the Little Brothers. The windows were in darkness. Wet and cold, old Giovanni crept inside and fell in a heap in a corner. Soon he was asleep. It was the music that woke him up. The church was blazing with candlelight and filled with people singing, "Gloria, Gloria." Giovanni could scarcely believe his eyes, so much beauty. A long procession of brothers, priests, sisters and townspeople, all carrying beautiful gifts, was winding its way through the church. They placed their gifts in front of a statue of a lady and her child. "What is all this?" asked old Giovanni of someone standing near. "Why, old man, it's the birthday of the Holy Child," the woman said. "It's the procession of the gifts." Giovanni watched in amazement until the singing was over. Then the church emptied of all the people and was dark except for the bright candles surrounding the lady and the child. Giovanni moved closer. The child in the lady's arms seemed so serious, so stern. "Oh, lady," said Giovanni, "I wish I had something to offer you. Your child seems so sad, even with all these beautiful gifts. But wait, I used to make people smile." Giovanni opened his bag and shook out his old costume. Then he put on his clown face, bowed, rolled out the little rug and began to juggle first the sticks, then the plates. Next he twirled the plates on sticks, and then the clubs and the rings. The brother sexton who was coming in to lock the doors saw Giovanni juggling. He was horrified. "Father, master," he cried, rushing off to get the priest. "A sacrilege! Come quickly!" But Giovanni didn't hear or notice him. "And now," said Giovanni, smiling at the face of the child, "first the red ball, then the orange, then next the yellow and the green, blue and violet. Up and around they went until they looked like a rainbow. And finally," cried Giovanni, "the sun in the heavens." The gold ball flew up and around, higher and higher. Giovanni had never juggled so well in all his life. Higher and higher, faster and faster. A blaze of colour filled the air. It was magnificent. Giovanni's heart was pounding. "For you, sweet child, for you," he cried. Then suddenly his old heart stopped and Giovanni fell dead to the floor. The priest and brother sexton came rushing in. Stooping over poor old Giovanni, the priest said, "Why, the poor clown is dead. May his soul rest in peace." But the brother sexton backed away, and with his mouth wide open he stared at the statue of the lady and her holy child. "Oh, Father," he said, pointing. "Oh, Father, look." The child was smiling, and in his hand he held the golden ball. It's sort of a smile. Got a lot close, don't you? It's interesting that in the Christian tradition, our reading from 1 Corinthians today, which was all about God making foolishness of the wise, etc. And a couple of other readings from Scripture. Actually, what came out of that in the early church was out of a particular type of monasticism came a thing called being the holy fool. And the holy fool was a monk who went out by himself and prayed and walked the streets to streets and begged and obviously would preach the gospel, but would do things that were right off the wall. They were renowned for taking their clothes off, sometimes as a sort of a sign of their foolishness. They would walk into a town and just take it all off and keep preaching. and they were known as the Holy Fools. I don't think the order survived. I'm not sure why, but it was a real thing for many, many years. And it really, I think, in a strange way, it really picked up the heart of some of what that 1 Corinthians reading was really about. Because that reading, I'll just get myself in the right place in here. The reading from 1 Corinthians is about the cross being foolishness. And when you think about it, it's sort of, Paul is pointing out that in the early church, again, you've got not only Jews and Greeks, but people from all over the in the early centuries, looking at Christianity and seeing that at the heart of the faith was this symbol of a cross and a crucified hero. In other words, at the heart of the faith was, in a sense, a symbol and a sign of defeat and foolishness. And so they decried the Christian faith on that basis. They also did on the basis that many of the people who were attracted to Christianity were, well, the Christian people were really levelled. They were known to be a faith that attracted not only the master but the slave. And they were equal in the eyes of the faith. And people didn't understand this total change of way of looking at the world. In our reading to from St. Paul in writing to 1 Corinthians, Paul is addressing a conflict. Now, you know that most of the time when Paul writes to the different churches, when you read into it, you can see that there's a conflict going on of one sort or another. And in this particular case, Paul, this reading, part of the reading, Paul is addressing the fact that people seem to have forgotten the true call of the faith. They've been sucked in to following a God or living out a faith that really praises success and praises the ability to preach really well. So people start following the best preacher in town. And Paul even names himself amongst those, rather than following Christ and Christ crucified. And he calls them back away from that, that sense of being sucked into power, back to the knowledge that at the heart of the faith is a crucified God. Paul confronts two things: the worship of knowledge and the obsession with power. When you look at the broken body that we celebrate so much in our faith, it's not a fine form, and people didn't find it that way. Paul's attack is not on the value of being wise. He is appealing to a new sort of wisdom. It's on the abuse of knowledge and its forms of power. Knowing more is a way of winning, and when it is such, it is abusive. And so Paul tries to turn that upside down like Jesus did so many times. Paul says that knowledge is a form of power that can divide humanity socially and religiously. The Corinthians confess their faith in a crucified Christ, a story which is a story of divine weakness, foolishness and poverty. But they had transformed it into an occasion for boasting about human power rather than staying with the foolishness of the cross. So they got sucked into wisdom, wealth and affluence. I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Peter. And in the ultimate attempt at a one-upmanship, some of them even compete by saying, I follow Christ. You know, to be honest, religion has been used and continues to be used to gain a sense of superiority, and a lot of us in the church nowadays, it's easy to forget that our faith is based on a crucified God. The story of a crucified Christ as the power and wisdom of God is supposed to take away our need for lust for power, because we're all equal under God. There is a lot in our reading for today. There is a confrontation for those who live in the world as if there is no God and so take the chance to exploit others. There's confrontation for those who narrowly define wisdom as rationality and become fools. But at its heart, it's about power and about how we see God. You know, I reckon that there's still a little part of us which believes that God should be strong and which hopes that God will someday smite all of our enemies. A little bit of smiting God of the people we don't like. Those people who seek to diminish or destroy us or other vulnerable people, often in God's name, we'd like God to come on and put them down. There's still a little part which sees God's truth only in the things that are beautiful, and which believes God works most powerfully through undamaged, privileged, eloquent people. And there's still a part which sees death as the dominant force in the world, and the trappings of death, poverty, trauma, war, as things to be avoided. You know, the cross shows us a God who looks weak, a God who looks ugly, a God who faces and embraces death. And so, as Paul said and admits, preaching the cross is foolishness itself. So foolish, in fact, that many churches have effectively rejected it and preach prosperity and power instead. What then is there for us in the cross? Why do we preach Christ crucified? Because there's really nothing good in crucifixion. I haven't tried it, but I take it on trust. Well, you know, to every person who knows violence and violation, to everyone who's ever been mocked, persecuted, vilified or rejected by a family or church for being who they are, or for standing with others who are shunned, the crucified Christ and the community of love are here for you. To every person who's crushed by disconnection and loneliness, who feels forsaken, forgotten and friendless, the crucified Christ and the community of love are here for you. For every person who's fed up with being and sickened by the silencing, the name calling, the lack of empathy, the victim blaming, to every person who cannot stomach a vengeful, violent, judgmental God, or the people who make themselves in that image, the crucified Christ and his community of love are here for you. This reading really does speak about turning the whole thing upside down. I love this picture. It's an old painting by Mikhail Serenov, and it's of a whole group of fairly wealthy church people, you see, all dressed in their robes and finery, and rich people around in the crowd. Look close. There's a half-naked bloke dancing in the front. He's a holy fool. And he subverts the whole painting into something else. He's pointing out the foolishness of everything, of the trappings that are in front of him. So, Paul invites us today to become, or continue to be, an inclusive, generous, spacious place where foolishness, where a lack of obvious success, for a lack of eloquence, a place where a lack of eloquence, a lack of necessarily beauty or wealth, a place where we together gather around the crucified Christ and know the power of